Welcome, Matt and McKay.
Thanks, Alex.
How's
Good
it
to be
going?
here.
Yeah, man.
How was the Atmos master class?
Thought it was very informative.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a general meeting of all the members of the Dolby ATMOS Mixers Network.
Yeah.
And we all generally get together to talk about, issues about, that we're dealing with either on the technical side or trying to, how we can further education of Dolby Atmos to the public, because there's a lot of disinformation out there.
I bet 'cause since it's still pretty new, I bet there's still a lot of kinks to work out. And
Yeah, and the group's still fairly new, so there's still a lot of kinks to work out. But it's a really great group of some incredibly talented people, and it's honestly it's an honor to be amongst some of these people.
how did it go today? Like, what were some of the topics? I know, like we were discussing earlier, how a lot of the streaming services are going to be offering immersive now. Netflix has immersive. Like, did you guys get into that?
We've all discussed that kind of stuff a little bit. We mainly try to talk about how our mixes are being rolled out, what new formats are our version of how Atmos is being rolled out, how to get the translation from one service to the next, who might be next in line to play the music the way we're creating it, and those kind of things. So
Yeah.
been a lot more of that.
Are there any other services? I know Apple has it. Are there any like streaming services right now, video streaming that are doing Atmos?
Video streaming?
Yeah, like any of like like HBO, like any of those, like Hulu. Do you know of any of them that are doing it yet, or is Netflix the first one?
Oh no, there's several services that will play Atmos movie mixes,
Yeah.
but for music, it's a different thing. So.
And for us, I think our that's mainly our concentration is work on. Most of us work in music.
Yeah.
So
I'm saying like the movies and shows that are streaming in Atmos, the sound effects and all that, but also when they incorporate a song in the score of the movie or in the score of the show,
Sure.
which is also in Atmos. So
Yeah.
it seems like that can get really there's a lot of moving parts there between the producers, the mixers. So
Yeah, and to the best of my knowledge, I think most of the time music mixes are coming to those re-recording mixers as stereo mixes instead of Atmos mixes. But I'm not in that post world, so I'm not sure if that's changing.
I can imagine that would, because think about this, like, the 5.1 is what we're used to for movies, right? Now in Atmos, you can see movies now in theaters in Atmos. And imagine not only is the sound effects and the scoring of the movie in Atmos, but now the music to whatever song they decide to feature is also in Atmos. Like the music is wrapping around, the sound design is wrapping around that sounds like it's gonna get really like complicated, but in a good way. Like, I don't know, I'm just trying to sit there and imagine myself in a theater watching like something crazy, like some show, like a new like the new HBO show The Last of Us, for example, which is really good. But I'm trying to imagine like all the sound effects and sound design of that, and then say that they decide to add some re-released Atmos track of like some classic hit, and that's also wrapped around you. So everything, the music and the score and the sound effects, is wrapping around you. Like, that just sounds like extremely awesome.
Wouldn't surprise me if it all started to head that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. Is that Dolby Atmos came out first for theaters, right?
Mm-hmm.
The thing about music generally in films, same with TV, but music, when we listen to music that's released as a music release, it's released as the featured emotion that you're trying to convey, right?
Mm-hmm.
With film and TV, a lot of times the music tracks that in there are staying out of the way of the
Super
dialogue.
low, yeah.
Not just even low, but EQ and everything may be focused on the dialogue, and creating a music event would have to be about the song in the movie. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's so rare that really happens
Yeah.
in film. I mean, scores, that part of it can really be immersive, but a lot of times it's kind of put out of the way to try to make sure the action, the dialogue is put together.
Right.
And in theaters, my experience listening to music mixes in theaters, like in headphones, the music's right on your ears, and it's also at this level of your head, right? In theaters, when I've listened to Atmos mixes that were created for music, the theaters have aisles on both sides of the theater, right? And the speakers are way above that aisle so that they'll hit everybody in the whole theater and whatnot. So if you imagine if a mix is created so that you're immersed with the musicians around you, all of a sudden the things that you've mixed in the studio that are really intimate, like the singer's right here, you've got guitars and things, you feel like the people are in the room, all of a sudden those people are...
They're up. They're up high.
And I didn't really notice that as much until I was getting into mixing music and listening to a lot of more music. First in surround, same thing with surround, 5.1 or whatever. But the intimacy disappears for me when I'm listening to a music mix in the theater, even though it's really cool and it's powerful and the systems are massive. But for some mixes, all of a sudden, like I say, everything's elevated. And it's like, oh, it's a little bit disconnected from when they were in my home. I just put a 714 in our living room because I'm mixing it and I kind of want to hear it in home and whatnot. But that intimacy of just the side speakers and the rear speakers being on your level is different for music than it is for theater in my experience, which is
it makes total sense.
Yeah.
I can imagine too. It heavily depends on what kind of song, what kind of track, what kind of genre. Because like you said, if it's a really intimate song like Johnny Cash, or like vocal and acoustic guitar, and then for whatever reason, say they use it in a movie or a show, and then they decide to spread it around, and then it's like, wait, you feel maybe disconnected from it at that point if they do move it around compared to what you're used to. So yeah, that makes total sense. So what do you guys see coming up for the future of Atmos in 2023?
Well, Tidal and Amazon also have it and support Atmos. So I think really the big question in that equation is what will Spotify jump on board? It's hard to tell, especially when in the current round of layoffs that you see going around in the tech industry in general.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the percentage of layoffs that Spotify did, but it begs the question. It's like, well, can they allocate those resources, enough resources to head that up?
Yeah, and I think that we're figuring out what the actual Netflix announcement is, but they've been playing surround and Atmos mixes, stereo, etc. I think the big announcement is that if you're listening on a stereo device, if your TV has a left and right speaker and that's all you're listening on, that I don't know if you know much about fold downs, but if I've got a mix that is built around a large array of speakers, but I'm only going to play it on 2 speakers, it may be playing an actual fold down of all these different channels into 2 speakers. So it's taking everything that I mixed in the height channels and rears and everything else, sides, putting them all in that mix. And you're losing some of the spatialization of that. With binaural mixes in headphones, that stuff, instead of just being mixed down to stereo, it's using a lot of psychoacoustic DSP processing to make your brain think it's behind us the way our ears hear, Yeah. But Netflix was delivering just the stereo mix before those speakers. Now they're using something supposedly with Sennheiser, an algorithm.
Some ambio thing.
Yeah, so there's DSP that's processing it so that you get a more immersive experience in stereo speakers.
Interesting.
But if you have a 714 rig or 5.1 set up at home, it's going to play the same 5.1 or Atmos mix that's been playing. It's just now people get a better experience in headphones and 2.0. That's what I've read so far. So if I'm wrong, then
interesting. Because like, for example, like if I bring up Netflix on this TV here, and so you're saying now with immersive, there's like an algorithm that creates, like, even with stereo, it'll create like a phantom, like 3D immersive thing just from listening right here.
That's what I've read thus far, and I don't think it's everything on Netflix. I think I was reading that it was a certain number of titles that have been processed this way so far. So I don't know if you've listened to Apple Music or something, binaural mixes,
No, I've only listened to Atmos at Matt
and
Wallace's
speakers. Okay, cool.
spot, which was awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Right.
So I'm kind of curious about, how do you guys feel about, when you're listening in the binaurals. And what are the headphones called? Like the Apple, like the earpods they have.
The AirPods
Pro
Pro and
or
the
Max.
AirPods Max.
Any headphones will play the binaural mix,
Okay.
but those are the only ones that will do head tracking, so the vocal kind of stays in the middle or
Yeah.
those kind of things.
So from your experience so far with these Atmos mixes, going from your system at home with all the speakers and then listening to it in binaural, how is the translation?
It's a very different experience. I mean, it's a headphone based experience, and it's never going to. Well, I don't want to say never, but at this moment in time, it seems to pale in comparison to the speaker experience, which I'm hoping with the Apple HomePod. The reintroduction of the larger HomePod. I'm hoping, in spite of the fact that right now you can only pair two of those speakers together.
Mm-hmm.
With the way the technology is working in there, I'm hoping that, you get a step up experience from being in headphones. But, I don't own any HomePods yet, so I'm not really sure how that's going to translate. But currently, AirPods Pro, AirPods Max with their head tracking, that can turn some people off. Some people like it. But using general headphones and listening to the playback on Apple, and Tidal and Amazon it's interesting, and it's definitely a more expansive version of stereo. But I think to really hear it, speakers is, whether it's a bunch of wired HomePods or something from Amazon or something from some other tech company, is going to ultimately be the way most consumers hear it.
Have you guys mixed anything in Atmos but only with earpods? Or
No,
'cause I'm
not
thinking-
commercially. No.
Yeah, maybe like
It's definitely a reference. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of like listening on a boombox, listening in your car, or mixing on speakers, and how's it translate to different formats, 5.1 headphones.
yeah, because like when we're doing stereo, we reference well I at least I reference on laptop speakers on the things the little the iPhone. So
Yep.
just to see how it will translate, and then you can make whatever adjustments you can that won't like fall short on either system, but just like a middle ground. So say for example, it's on your iPhone, it's a little too sibilant, so you can get away with reducing some sibilance on all the platforms and it's still fine. But for example, like I'm just thinking, well, for a while, if it's going to be binaural and you're going to be listening from Spotify, Tidal, Apple with your earpods, because most people, 99% of people aren't going to have the speakers at home, like the
Sure.
setup. So
Yeah, totally.
just curious, because I know in Logic you can just you can mix just, I think it's built in, or there's some plug-in, and maybe with the new Pro Tools too, like you can just start doing it in Atmos and have your objects. And if you have you could probably get used to it with the pods until you have the full setup. So yeah, I'm very intrigued. I haven't had any inquiries about Atmos yet, so I'm probably not going to go down that road until
Yeah.
the demand is there, because I'm still just doing stereo stuff. But so have you guys had to drastically change mixes after listening down? Like, have you had releases yet that have been out on Apple in your Atmos mixes, and you listen to it and you're like, are you excited about it? Is there a disappointment because it's so different, or what is that like?
Wow, that's a loaded question.
Yeah.
It's almost like saying,
Because
yeah.
even without, okay, when I first started hearing stuff that I did upload it to Spotify, because they used to do even more compression and weird shit, and now it's still like same thing with YouTube. You hear your stuff back and you're kind of disappointed because of so much algorithm and processing they've done to it. So I'm just curious about how, when you've listened to your stuff back that's been released, are you like super stoked on it, or are you hoping that the technology will improve quickly to be more to translate better, if you know what I'm
Sure.
saying?
What's your experience been?
Well, let's circle back just a little bit, because you're asking about the headphone experience in general. And one thing that a lot of people don't know, like the way this is Dolby Atmos music and other formats that are built around the binaural, meaning 2 ears. We only have 2 ears, and you can hear stuff. Your brain says it's in front of you, behind you. You know, how do you know that from left and right? We have all these anatomical things, our shoulders, our pinnae of our ears, and all these things that are telling our brain with, you know, you're hearing it in this ear, and the delay that it takes to get to this ear and stuff tells you that it's from this direction, that kind of stuff. So at Dolby and several other places all over the world, they've been, how does our brain do that, you know? And a lot of it comes down to this thing called HRTF. Have you heard of HRTF before? Mm-hmm. So it's called head-related transfer function. And it's basically, I think of it like, it's almost like a glasses prescription. And I was lucky to be on the listening team at Dolby for a while, and they're testing engineers and classical musicians and stuff and go, where do you hear this? You know, which one sounds better, that kind of thing. So we go in and do that, you know, a few hours at a time every week, and they're collecting data. And basically what that is trying to find, like, when I'm listening to a mix, I may really hear something as above me, and I mixed it above me, and then I play it for Matt, and he's like, I don't know, it kind of sounds behind me or something. Because there's this whole anatomical element that's telling you, your brain, you're accustomed to this thing. So with Dolby, they've been trying to find this general population, one measurement, like giving everybody reading glasses. And some people are like, oh my God, it's so clear. You know, I've never been able to, it's completely behind me. The next person's like, it's kind of like blurry stereo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's almost like we're mixing for a model of car that's going to sound completely different to everybody, even though it's a 1997 Toyota Camry, you know, and you're like, it never sounds as good as it did in the studio, but at least you knew when people went in there, it was going to kind of work in that car for most people. What's happening now is Dolby has released some software, and Apple has released on the iPhone, iOS 16. You can take a picture literally of both sides of your head, and it tries to translate that into your own personal HRTF measurement. So some people have done that, and they're like, whoa, it's way better. And some people are like, nah, it sounds kind of the same. And if you're kind of used to the general prescription or profile, it may not change much for you. But for a lot of people, it may be like, because if you're using the profile that, you know, a bunch of us created, you're going to be like, sounds like it did before, because you're used to that profile, and your anatomy fits. You look like me, or you whatever. You know, your ears are the same shape or something. So we're kind of hitting this target of like, the more the technology, every iOS update or whatever device you're using, people are just going to get their phone and like, new phone, put in your fingerprint, you know, say your name to Siri or whatever, and now
take your picture.
It's like bam, and
like
your music.
Calibrate your audio experience.
But to address the question of, you know, are you disappointed to hear how things sound?
No, I don't mean it like, I meant it like more like, you know, because even when we do stereo stuff, sometimes, like I said, depending on what the service does with it, it's not because of something, maybe not because something you did that was wrong,
right,
or with the mix. It's just the way that it's translating. You're like, what's going on there? And I'm just wondering if you've experienced that so far.
I won't go into the minutia of all this, but essentially, like when we do an Atmos mix currently, there's, for headphones, there's metadata that's associated with, you know, how close or far something is from the ear in the headphone experience. Currently, Amazon and Tidal respect that metadata.
Okay.
And not to say that Apple disrespects it, but Apple's processing things in a different way, and therefore they don't pay attention to that metadata. So some of the playback elements that you're expecting, that you heard in the binaural originally, are not coming across in the same way on Apple. That algorithm, I think, has changed a few times over the last year. Apple's a big black box. There's lots of secrets going on, and they don't really publicize every change that they do.
Yeah.
So I've heard from people to say that, you know, that ultimately may come more into the point where they're more in line with Amazon and Tidal. Who knows? It's Apple. But for me, when I mix, I listen on the speakers, I listen to the binaural, and I stopped trying to chase, like, well, what does it sound like on the AirPods? I started that way, But now I'm kind of like, well, that's a moving target right
Exactly. I
now.
was gonna say, because it's going to constantly change, just like with stuff with stereo. Like they change the LUFS level. They keep messing with stuff, so it's like you can't really.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna get
Yeah.
it to sound great on speakers
Yeah,
and
right.
check it on my headphones, and then sign off on it,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, for peace of mind.
and we'll just
Yeah.
see where it lands on Apple. But so far, so far so good.
Yeah, it was similar with streaming services when we were mixing in stereo and it went from CD to streaming. Everybody's trying to run through different services, streaming services, algorithms to go, what's it going to do to the top end? Where do I need to change my filtering to make sure it still punches through and doesn't sound like it's underwater up
Yeah.
here? But as bandwidth got more increased, and instead of buffering and running at 96 kbps for the first 1 minute waiting for the internet to catch up,
Yeah.
now they can run a better quality. And you're like, that's not really as big a factor anymore because bandwidth is just better. So we're kind of hoping that's gonna, there's a lot of data flying around, so that's part of it. We're waiting for each OS update can actually make what we create in the studio sound closer when you listen, in headphones.
Plus, all the streaming services seem to be going towards the way of lossless
Sure.
audio anyway, so that helps.
Which is trickier with that many,
Yeah.
giant files, so.
So when you're doing an Atmos mix, when you upload that to the service, or the client does it once it's complete, do you also have, is the binaural is the fold down, it's not your stereo mix, or do you do a separate stereo mix as well? Because I can imagine, like, if for some reason the fold down doesn't fold down like how you would hear it in the stereo mix, that
Yeah.
I'm thinking, do you also upload, like, when the customer or when the consumer switches to, say it defaults in the future to Atmos, if that's available,
Yeah.
but they want to hear, is it doing that already?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So say that they want to just hear the stereo version. Is that a separate stereo mix and master?
That's a separate
Okay.
file
Usually.
entirely.
Okay, cool.
And
Okay.
but the binaural is part of the ADM file that you deliver. So you're like, if you're an independent artist and you're distributing on DistroKid, you would upload your stereo mix and your ADM file, as those would be your files.
Gotcha. Okay.
And the binaural essentially is derived from the ADM file.
Yeah, that's what so many people are, engineers, et cetera, music people are excited about Atmos, is that with previous formats like 5.1, you had to have that number of speakers, or whatever was mixed in that audio wouldn't play. It'd just
Right.
be muted.
Right.
Right. So Atmos and some other formats are scalable. So it literally plays a different mix to fit your system. So it checks your device and goes, okay, you're using headphones on an iPhone. I'm going to stream this version of it. So it's kind of the way with stereo speakers, you get a phantom image to get center, right?
Yeah.
If you've got 5 speakers, but we mixed it with objects up here and you don't have those speakers, or we mixed in between 2 of your speakers, if I don't have a speaker there, it's going to play a version of that will use phantom imaging.
Okay.
Both in the middle of speakers, sometimes between speakers. Like I've got 2 up here, but I mixed it with 6, then
Yeah.
it may bring them back. If I've got 6, it may play it somewhere in the middle. That's the thing about object-based formats, is it's just looking for a coordinate. And if there's a speaker there, it'll play it. If there's 3 speakers in the system and it needs to be here, then it'll adjust the volume of these to play it like phantom imaging does in stereo. You know?
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
it's scalable down to 2.0 or
Okay.
Right. So,
40
for example,
speakers.
in the new MacBook Pros, the M2s, if you look at the specs, it says there's 6 speakers, like even in the 14-inch MacBook Pro.
Really? Wow.
And that it could play back Atmos. Now, I've yet to hear that, but I mean, that's fascinating to think that it would scale to that.
Yeah. Wow. So just they would have like 3 on a side, or 3 on each side, or something like
Yeah, I
that.
have no idea.
Wow.
But once again, I think it all comes down to, you can mix it on, a system that's got, a 714 system, which is, essentially, was it 12 speakers?
yeah. 7
12,
here,
right,
4 up
right.
top,
Well, and a subwoofer, right? So you can mix it on 12 speakers and have a particular resolution, and the mix hopefully will translate, depending on the mixer, I guess. The mix will translate to different size systems the more elaborate the system, I guess, the higher the resolution and clarity of where, is the guitar here? Does it really feel like it's here? Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Depending on the system.
So when you're mixing an Atmos, are you thinking about how it might potentially fold down? Say, for example, you have for whatever reason you have like a bunch of horns like above and on the side of you, and say someone at home is listening to your track that is placed on a Netflix thing, and they have like a 5.1. So
Yep.
in theory, those horns will fold down into will that like cram them in, like all of them into a speaker?
That's really cool is you're used to mixing in stereo anyway. We've all been doing that, right? And you're usually checking mono compatibility, right? This is like that times several different things.
Okay.
If you're working in 916, you're listening to a 5.1 fold down for sure to see what that's going to work, because there might be a lot of systems out there, and there's a lot of other ways that 5.1 is used to create other formats. But you're listening to the binaural, both if you're working in the Dolby Atmos renderer, it's going to make a binaural that's going to play on Amazon using this particular codec, where Apple is getting rid of all the data that was used for local cycle
Right, all the
acoustic level.
metadata we were talking about.
Yeah. Like if you're giving data of, I want this object to sound like it's further away than this one, that kind of thing. Apple gets rid of that and uses their own version. It's kind of like, hey, we substituted your lexicon reverb. We're going to use the MIDI verb for the room sound. You know what I mean?
Okay.
If anybody knows that stuff. Anyway, so you got to listen to the Apple version because the listener base is so massive. And you've also got to listen to the Dolby version because it's getting played through other streaming services.
Okay, so yes, so basically as you're working on it, you reference the full system, then you can fold it down and listen to how is it on Apple, how is it in 5.1, how is it, so you can check everything in every fold down situation.
Yeah, you can 2.0, 5.1, 7.1.
Yeah.
And
instead of just before going mono, now we're like, okay, AirPods, regular headphones, 5.1, et cetera, and see how it's working.
That makes more sense, yeah. Because I was a little confused about that for a bit. So, what about the mastering? And is that still kind of a mystery, or is there just no mastering? It's just like you get it loud, you get it as loud as you can, or is there like a specific LUFS target level?
There's a target level of -18 with a true peak of -1. And
max.
And so when it the mastering thing is really a hot topic. Depends on who you're asking, and there's a sense from I'll spew out some of the opinions. Some of the opinions say that I've got a Dolby Atmos tuned room, like Dolby came to my room and they tuned it. I'm hitting these target levels. Why do I need to master? Right, I can master it on my own because I don't want anybody to mess with it. People in the mastering community, feel that they play a part in this. There's some disagreement about that, depending on who you ask. And so there's many mixing engineers who are doing their own mastering for this and doing just fine. But then there's some people who are having other people master. They're doing fine as well. I think it really depends on the individual, their workflow, their relationship with their mastering engineer, and there's just so many factors that there's just not one way right now that people are subscribing to. There's a few.
In particular, there's a whole lot, as we just talked about. There's a lot more quality control. You've got to hit so many different playback options. And you're trying to listen to that and make sure, not like with stereo, you're like, is it balanced in frequency response or whatever? Or is it balanced in, loudness spec, transients? Is it going to cut through on small speakers and play in big speakers if it's supposed to with the right amount of booty or whatever, right?
Yeah.
In the immersive formats, it's not only that you're trying to hit a certain level, but in stereo, we're all trying to create feelings, whatever style of music it is. It really needs to hit you aggressively, or it needs to be really emotional, whatever it is. When you're creating a virtual space, the sounds are passing through the room, you know. So if I suddenly compress the whole mix, where I've got this feeling of like when I'm working on a mix, if a sound originates from the front, a violin or a drum hit or something, and it passes through a real room, it kind of hits different surfaces and it changes in tonality as it goes, right? If you really squash things, or somebody doesn't know your intent and they're trying to hit specs and they're changing the balance of bright to dark in timbre, in spectral, you know, whatever frequency response or frequencies are going in each zone of the room, and compressing or limiting things in a way, it can literally change how that stuff passes through the room and how it responds. All of a sudden, what used to be darker back here, like as a snare drum hits in the front speakers, boom, it's like, pah, it's really bright, and back here is like, right? If I brighten up the back of the room because I want the strings back there to be a little brighter and cut through, now all of a sudden that reverb back here is brighter too. So my ears are suddenly, they weren't paying attention to the reverb behind me with the snare drum. They were just like, psst, and now it's like, psst, it's all behind me. So I get a little confused of like, it doesn't feel like a real room anymore. It's like I'm in a giant bathroom or something. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
So if, you know, I guess to say if one does use a mastering engineer, there has to be a large level of communication of intent.
Yeah.
And a lot of things to pay attention to. So a lot of us, I think, are resorting to mastering ourselves with minor tweaks at the very end, if any, because we're getting it to a point that we're happy with it. Artist is happy with it. Artist is signed off. You know, people don't necessarily want to hear a change.
Yeah, because
So-
I'm trying to understand. I mean, since there's so many, you know, with stereo, obviously you have one bus, a stereo bus. That's all you have to worry about. With this, there's like multiple buses, so you can't really treat all of them as one, like as you just explained, because it will drastically change all the dynamics and space and frequencies within your Atmos mix. So are you like treating each bus separately and then kind of just doing final touches overall to each object or each bus, and then just kind of letting the mix be the mix, and that's the master?
That's kind of a complicated
It's one of those,
thing.
it
depends
everything
on
affects everything, and then times, you know, 128. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like with stereo, you're like, I need to punch more, and you're like, oh, suddenly the reverbs came up in the stereo mix because I squashed it, and you're like, okay, I need the mix to come back.
Yeah.
Something came forward that I didn't want to come forward. That's a feeling that's coming at you either from speakers from in front of you or from the side, which is one of the beautiful things that anybody who's experienced in speakers, not anybody, but most people, is that the energy passes through your body in more directions than one. Just like in a real concert, a room, things are bouncing off the walls, you know what I mean?
And above you, to the side of you.
In real spaces, right? Like even if the performers are in front of you, you're not just getting light from the front. That stuff's happening everywhere. The sound is coming from. If you're creating a mix that has, you know, I've been a couple of, you know, rock mixes where you're like, okay, I want to put the guitars up front. If it's just a concert, you're like speakers up there, reverbs make the room come alive. But some really sick mixes are having things pummel you from different directions, because in headphones it's one thing. It's like, oh, this is pretty cool. But in speakers, as you know, having a drummer, you know, behind you or the guitar over here feels way different from everybody being in front. You know, if anybody's ever been in a rehearsal and you had two guitars, you know, somewhere that you stood somewhere else, it's like, it's the difference of having music sprayed at you and being in a, you know, a giant lake of turbulence that can be killer or really soothing. So all that energy changes. There's so many points of where that whole balance can change, and then the feeling changes. So being able to do it while you're mixing and going, not sending it to somebody and then having them treat it without knowing how 1 dB of balance of all these literally energies, feelings affect you. As a mixer, you're able to tweak that on the spot and hit the levels.
Right.
As a mastering engineer, you've got an outside opinion, which may be perfect. Yeah, it's just too dull back here, and you might send it to somebody and go, and they're like, oh, that still really works, and it is more exciting. But the balance of how it passes through the room, if there is time-based effects like delays and reverbs that give you that sense of either being in a real space or a surreal space where stuff is just bananas and out of this world,
Yeah.
it's delicate, and it's great when you get it right.
I'm imagining like live albums being remixed in Atmos, and just not even just like you said, to get the feeling of like you're in the audience at like a huge stadium, and the guitars are in front of you, but they're ricocheting around you because of the stadium and the sibilance, and it's like it's flying at you instead of.
Or a club, like if you listen to Bob Clearmountain's mix of the Stones at the Elmo Combo in Canada, like the band is here and the audience is like you're in the audience.
Yeah,
and it's cool.
It feels like you're getting closer to either being at a rehearsal as a musician or a show, or being in the middle of an orchestra, or having the people around you.
Yeah. That's what I'm really excited about, to like for more of that kind of like audience, like you said, orchestras, big concerts, like halls of. That's like did Will show you his horn piece that he did?
I think he sent that to me, and I have yet to listen to it.
That was like, I was really like, they showed me a lot of stuff over there. Like they showed me the Dio track and the B-52s track.
Okay.
And but there was a project that Will did that was just phenomenal. It was like a big band with horns, and it sounded so freaking good.
I got to listen to it.
Exactly, it's exactly what we were just talking about, how you feel like you're in the room with them, like in the audience.
Yeah.
It's killer.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to go catch a plane.
Yeah. All right, well, guys, thank you so much for coming by. It was great to nerd out a little bit.
Yeah, great to see you, Alex.